My Lords, until last night I had a very technical argument about the amendments, what they would do and how they would work. But I sat in the gallery of the other place for several hours last night to listen to the debate on the creative industries and listened to what I didn't see from the gallery virtually. And it really made me reconsider my approach today. What was striking was that whether Green, DUP, Liberal Democrat, Conservative, or the government's own backbench, the single biggest concern of a debate that ran for hours with many speakers was the question of copyright and AI. Indeed, it figured in all but 2 or 3 speeches. Moreover, as I sat in the gallery and people started to read in the Times, in the Mail, in Politico, and the tech blogs, an increasing flow of MPs, many on the government's own benches, and some actually in the government itself, texted me to say that their leadership was wrong and they hoped this fight would be won for the UK's creative industries. My Lords, it is a very great privilege to be on these benches and never have to vote against the whip. But I would say to my friends and colleagues from all sides that today, as we debate, there are hundreds of organisations and many individual rights holders watching. They are watching to see what this House is going to do in the face of a government proposal that will transfer their hard-earned property from them to another sector without compensation. And with it, their possibility of a creative life or a creative life for the next generation. The government is doing this not because the current law does not protect intellectual property rights, nor because they don't understand the devastation it will cause, but because they are hooked on the delusion that the UK's best interest and economic future aligns with that of Silicon Valley. The Minister will say to the House that we have a consultation ongoing and we should wait for the results of that. This was the same line the Minister, Chris Bryant, in the other place last night took. He said his door and his mind were open. But if that is the case, I'd like to know why the Honourable Dame Caroline Dinenage, chair of the Commons Select Committee, said she felt gaslit by ministers and the Secretary of State. I'd also like to know why the minister in charge of this in the other place has refused a meeting with me twice, and why the creative industries say they get blandishments from a junior minister whilst the AI companies get the undivided attention of the Secretary of State. My Lords, most importantly, the assertion that the consultation is open and fair is critically undermined because it was launched with a preferred option. And for the record, the government's preferred option is to give away the property rights of those who earn them on the promise of growth, growth, growth to the nation. Unfortunately, the government cannot say to whom that growth will accrue, how much it will be, but the one thing they are absolutely sure of, government, opposition, AI companies, and those whose property rights the government is giving away, is that it will not accrue to the creative industries. My Lords, what we have before us is the most extraordinary sight of a Labour government transferring wealth directly from 2.4 million individual creatives, SMEs, UK brands, on the promise of vague riches in the future. And before I turn to the opposition, which I will, I want to make clear that there is a role in our economy for AI. There is a role in our economy for companies headquartered elsewhere, and there is a role in our economy for new AI models, and there is an opportunity of growth in the combination of AI and creative industries. But this forced marriage on slave terms is not it. So, my Lords, we have the government who puts growth front and centre, stunting one of its most lucrative industries. And we have the equally extraordinary sight of the Conservative opposition who, for the most part, are sitting on their hands against the wishes of many in their tribe, putting party ahead of country because they prefer to have proof of the government's economic incompetence rather than protect the property rights of its citizens and creative industries. So, my lords, let me kill a few sacred cows. Judges, lawyers, academics all agree that the law on copyright is clear. The ICO determination that copyright stands in spite of the advances of AI is also clear. So that ministers choosing to mirror tech lobbyist language of uncertainty rather than defending the property rights of its citizens and wealth creators is bewildering. Because they're not quoting the law or the experts. They point at the number of court cases as proof of lack of clarity. But, my lords, I am at a loss. Since a person who's had their goods stolen relying on their legal rights seems to me to be a sign that the law is clear. I do, however, think that given the scale of the theft and the audacity of the robber barons, they should be able to turn to the government for protection, rather than suggesting we redefine the notion of theft. The Honourable Chris Bryant, the Minister, said last night that change is needed and we cannot do nothing. And the unified voices of the creative industries from the biggest brands like Sony and Disney, the newspapers like Telegraph, FT, Guardian, those that represent publishers, music or visual artists, or the artists themselves, they all agree. Nobody's saying leave it as it is. They're saying make the copyright regime fit for the age of AI, which is exactly what the amendments do. The amendments surface the names and owners of the crawlers that currently operate anonymously. They record when, where and how IP is taken, and crucially they allow creators to understand what has been taken so they can seek redress. This is not new burdensome regulation, my lords, and it's certainly less regulation than the incredibly complex, costly and ultimately unworkable opt-outs or rights reservation mechanism of the preferred option of the consultation. All the creators are asking for is the enforcement of an existing property right. And my lords, when I say creators, I am not talking about 19th century aristocrats occupying the time between lunch and dinner. In spite of the immense pleasure and extraordinary soft power that the creative industries bring, it is a hard-nosed, incredibly competitive and successful sector. A sector that takes training, skill, talent to pursue what is often an insecure career in which the copyright of career highs pays for the costs of a freelance life and the ongoing costs of making new work. In the other place last night, the Minister talked about transparency without reference to the fact that the tech lobby is already on manoeuvres, saying transparency must not be too detailed because it will impact on their IP. Creatives' IP is being given away for literally nothing, but AI companies wish to hide behind the IP of products that are simply impossible to make without the raw material of that data. So I asked the Minister to explain to the House why the government pays for software licenses, why does our NHS pay for drugs, why do members of the Cabinet pay for branded clothes, yet the government thinks that the creative industry should invent something for nothing. The government says doing nothing is an option. Agreed. It could call a halt to the theft. It could instruct the ICO, the IPO to act now. It could even do an impact assessment of its preferred policy. Because, my lords, this is the most extraordinary thing. The government's preferred way forward has a preferred way forward, but when I asked, they had to admit they'd not done an economic impact assessment, including job displacement, even while acknowledging job losses are inevitable. The Prime Minister cited an IMF report that claimed if fully realised, the gains from AI could be worth up to an average of 47 billion to the UK each year over a decade. What he didn't say was that that very same IMF report suggested unemployment would increase by 5.5% over the same period. This is a big number, a lot of jobs, a very significant cost for the taxpayer. Nor does the 47 billion account for the transfer of funds from one sector to another. The creative industries contribute 126 billion per year to the economy. I don't understand the excitement about the 4.7 when you're giving up 126. Sorry, my lords, the government have a preferred option, but they have no enforcement mechanism. They have a preferred option, but no protocols to make it work. They have a preferred option, but by their own admission, they have no idea how an individual artist could possibly hope to chase down dozens, hundreds, maybe thousands of AI companies to opt out or trace their work and rights. The government has a preferred option, which is to give away other people's living and their vast contribution to the treasury, and with it the jobs, joy and soft power of our creative industries that the country relies on globally. My lords, there are plenty of great ideas of how creativity could add GDP to the country, but that's not the demand the government has made of the sector. And I will not quote most of those I've spoken to in the last week because the language is unparliamentary. But I will pass on the deep regret of Lord Lloyd Webber, who regrets that he is no longer in his place to stand by me today, and a Labour donor who said this was economically illiterate. These amendments set out how copyright regime could work. Amendment 61 ensures that all operators and web crawlers must comply with UK law if they're marketed in the UK. Amendments 62, 63 require operators to be transparent about their identity and purpose, and they allow creators to understand if their content had been stolen. Amendment 64 gives enforcement powers to the ICO and allows for private right of action by copyright holders. 44A requires the ICO to report on its enforcement record. And finally, Amendment 65 requires the Secretary of State to review technical solutions which might support a strong copyright regime. These are practical, sensible amendments that could support a valuable industry whilst looking forward to new technical efficiencies as they emerge. Before I sit down, I beg your pardon. To all the members of the other place who last night talked warmly about the creativity of their own communities of individual artists and small companies or centres of excellence, I would ask the question, how will they survive if their livelihood is dependent on chasing after AI bots that have scraped at their opt-out work? And can they survive if the only way to own their own work is to opt out of the primary arena of distribution, sales and archiving? And what do they make of our galleries and museums? Should they also opt out to protect their artists? And if so, what does that do to the tourism of which the Minister last night was so proud to announce that the arts were the primary driver? So before I sit down, let me quickly mention DeepSeek, a Chinese bot perhaps as good as the US, we'll see, but certainly a potential beneficiary of the AI scraping exemption that's proposed. Who cares that it doesn't recognize Taiwan or know what happened in Tiananmen Square? It was built for $5 million and wiped $1 trillion off the value of the US AI sector. The uncertainty that the government claims is not an uncertainty of how copyright works. It's uncertainty of who will be the winners and losers in the race for AI. In rejecting the amendments that could, in a matter of weeks, protect the income of the UK's second most valuable industrial sector, it's pushing us into an uncertain and unsustainable future in which anyone with 5 million is to be entitled to the spoils of the UK creative industry.